Dave Simon MMA on Twitter and ringsidereport.net. Dave, obviously, some of the more memorable storylines coming out of this particular UFC from last night, UFC 162, namely Anderson Silva losing. Now, to put this in perspective, Dave, tell us what the odds were of him losing, or what the line was for his opponent last night, roughly.
Anderson was about a 2.5 to 1 favorite, looking at minus 240 going into the fight. It wasn't as heavy a favorite as he has been in the past, so a lot of people were thinking Weidman had a better chance than a lot of the opponents he'd gone through in his past 16 fights in the UFC, where he's gone undefeated inside the octagon. Weidman last night not only taking the UFC middleweight title from Anderson, but also becoming the first man to defeat him in the UFC, and the first man to ever knock him out. And this is a career that has spanned since 1997. Anderson Silva's been fighting for a long time. He's 38 years old, and last night was the first time he'd ever been knocked out.
Now, who is Weidman? Tell us a little bit about this guy.
Chris Weidman is 29 years old, from Long Island, New York. He was an NCAA Division I All-American wrestler, and he's a very tough guy with a very good ground game that people were expecting would be his key to victory if he was to win. A lot of people looking at this fight and saying, well, if Weidman can take Anderson down, he may be able to keep him down and win on points after 5 rounds and get the decision, or maybe get a submission on Anderson Silva. Weidman was able to get Anderson down, looked for a guillotine, looked for a couple submissions, wasn't able to get anything. Anderson stood back up, and then Anderson started toying with him on the feet, seemingly just having no problem landing his shots where Weidman was struggling to land his shots, and Anderson seemed like he was really playing around. Not anything we haven't seen before from Anderson Silva, but it continued in the second round. He continued to toy around with Weidman. He got hit with a punch, acted like it hurt him, but was really just kind of messing with him, and then got cracked with another punch that put him out and dropped him. A lot of people looking at Anderson Silva's performance last night as puzzling. The guy is so good, so dominant. He seemed like he could have won the fight at any time, but maybe playing around, not respecting Weidman enough, not thinking that there was a punch in the world that could possibly put him out. He got caught, and it's just the lesson you have to learn. Respect everyone inside the octagon. Meanwhile, Chris Weidman has his life changed. This is a guy that is undefeated now, 10-0 in his mixed martial arts career. Very young in his MMA career. He's got the whole world ahead of him. Very good jiu-jitsu, very good wrestling, and obviously some serious power in his hands. So
despite being 29, relatively new to the game?
Yeah, Weidman has been fighting here as a professional for just a few years. He's only been fighting since 2009.
Wow.
He's only 6-0 in the UFC and 10-0 as a professional. You compare that to Anderson Silva. I mean, the guy's been fighting since 97. Last night was his 38th professional fight and only Weidman's 10th. You know, you got to give the experience advantage there to Anderson Silva. People were thinking, Weidman
well, the other thing, too, about Silva
have trouble there.
Is it could easily be much more, but the fact is he's been champ for so long, and the champ obviously has his fights spaced out a little more than some of the regulars. So, if he could easily have had, 50 fights in terms of, had he not, but he's just so darn good. They bill him up for each one. So clearly the UFC saw something in Weidman to give him this chance, even though, like you mentioned, he'd only had a few fights in the UFC. Were you surprised that he got this fight?
No, I wasn't surprised. A lot of people were calling for Weidman to be that guy. I saw him as the number one contender. There was really not that many good options. There weren't many good options for Anderson at 185 pounds. Michael Bisping was looked at as a guy that was maybe going to get the shot. He fought Vitor Belfort and got knocked out. Vitor's a guy that's up there, but Vitor fought Anderson and got obliterated, so nobody really wants to see that fight. So Weidman kind of got the title shot because there was no one else. He beat Mark Munoz a year ago by knockout, then suffered a shoulder injury that took him out of a fight in December. He suffered through that time. His house got completely destroyed and flooded through Hurricane Sandy. He went through a lot, in the past year leading up to this fight. It's a crazy story. I mean, you could make a movie about this guy's life tomorrow. He's had a crazy life, a crazy ride, and it's really just beginning. It looks like an Anderson Silva rematch is on the horizon.
I was going to ask, Dave,
Yeah.
what are the chances of that, and what were they saying after the fight?
Well, Anderson was saying he doesn't want to retire, but he doesn't want a rematch for the belt. It's Weidman's time now, and he wants to have other fights. There's talk of Anderson Silva fighting Roy Jones Jr. in a boxing match. There was a lot of talk before this fight about Anderson against GSP or Anderson against John Jones. I think all talk of that is completely done now. It's really interesting to see what Anderson's going to do, what you're going to be able to convince Anderson of doing. Dana White said he's going to do the rematch. Dana White said before the fight that if Weidman won, they'd do it again. And he said after the fight that they're planning on doing the rematch, and Anderson is going to get some time to think about it, be with his family, but he's going to get the call in a few weeks, and he's going to be asked to fight Chris Weidman again.
So it feels like Anderson almost, after the fight, was relieved, kind of like a burden, kind of like, okay, well, every week, I just got to take on the best in this particular category. I have to defend. I have to do what the UFC wants. Now he's almost, perhaps from what you're saying, a little freed up to say, oh, wow, I have all these different options. I could maybe do this, maybe do that, maybe. So he isn't so ready to jump back in. What do you think is going to happen here? Do you think at the end the UFC is just going to have to throw a whole lot of extra money to convince him for the rematch?
I think that they're going to pay him what they need to pay him, and they're going to put the fight in Brazil. And I think that's going to be the clincher. They're going to say, look, your Brazilian fans want to see you fight again. They want to see you get a rematch. We'll do it in Brazil. We'll do it in a big stadium, and you'll fight Chris Weidman again.
How about that, huh?
And we'll see.
For your first defense. Weidman, congratulations. All right, so your next opponent, Anderson Silva, in Brazil. How about that?
Well, look,
That's
a lot
brutal.
of people are saying after this fight, well, Anderson was not taking him seriously. Weidman won, but really Anderson lost. Anderson was clowning around. If he would have taken seriously, Weidman would have been destroyed. So here's Weidman's opportunity to prove everybody wrong, to prove himself as the champion, go into Brazil, and beat the guy in his own home turf. If he can do that, there'll be no questions that Chris Weidman is that number one middleweight in the world.
That's another way of looking at it. All right, elsewhere on the card, anything of interest?
Yeah, I mean, Frankie Edgar had a hell of a fight in the co-main event. Frankie, he's had a rough ride for a while. He was a former UFC lightweight champion, losing a close decision to Benson Henderson. They had an immediate rematch because it was so close, and Frankie lost that decision. I thought he actually won the title and won the fight and should still be the lightweight champion. He dropped down to 145 pounds, fought the champion there, Jose Aldo, lost another close decision that you could have made an argument for him winning, and now his first non-title fight in, I think, 8 fights in a few years. It goes 3 rounds, and he gets the decision finally on his side. A great fight with Charles Oliveira. He won it unanimously, all 3 rounds on 2 judges' scorecards, and 2 or 3 on the other.
Where does he go from here? Does he go back up? Does he stay at this weight?
No, I think he's going to stay at 145 pounds. I think this is the home for Frankie Edgar right now. He's not going to get a title shot right away, but I think another fight, another win for Frankie, and he should get a title shot. Cub Swanson was also on this pay-per-view card. He looked very impressive, knocking out Dennis Siver in the 3rd round. Swanson is a fellow featherweight. I think Swanson versus Edgar would be a tremendous fight and would solve a lot of things as far as who's the next contender in the UFC featherweight division. Jose Aldo, the champion in that weight class, will defend his title on August the 3rd at UFC 163, the next UFC pay-per-view. That'll be in his home country of Brazil, taking on the Korean fighter, the Korean zombie, Chan Sung Jung.
All right, in terms of network, anything coming up or any television?
Yeah, on Fox, UFC on Fox 8. It'll be on July 27th, so the UFC taking a couple weeks off. They'll be back in 3 weeks' time on the main Fox, the big Fox. It'll be Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson taking on John Moraga. Mighty Mouse is the 125-pound champion. The flyweights taking center stage there. As far as the local angle, Rory McDonald, who's a Canadian fighter who trains here in Montreal, he's got a big fight in the co-main event against Jake Ellenberger. That's a big battle of 2 top 10 welterweights in the UFC. That should be a real interesting fight.